Let's travel back in time, way back to 1690. Imagine this. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, facing a financial crisis, makes a bold move that would change history forever. They issued the first ever paper currency in America to fund military operations. That's right, the very first US banknotes weren't about buying groceries or paying rent. They were literally war money. But wait, here's the kicker. It wasn't until 1776, almost a century later, that the first $2 bill made its debut. And just 9 years after that, in 1785, the iconic dollar sign we all recognize today was officially adopted. But guess what? It's not even American in origin. The symbol came from the Spanish-American peso, which was one of the most widely used currencies in the world at that time. Now here's where things get really wild. Did you know that for almost 2 centuries, the US government wasn't even the one printing money? That's right, private companies were in charge of printing banknotes. Imagine your money being produced by private firms instead of a central authority. Sounds chaotic, right? But in 1863, the government said, enough is enough. They created the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the National Currency Bureau to take control. Finally, in 1869, centralized money printing began at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And here's a fun fact. Those early notes weren't just printed on plain paper. They had intricate designs to prevent counterfeiting. Okay, buckle up, because this one will blow your mind. Did you know that the only woman to ever appear on a US banknote was Martha Washington? That's right. George Washington's wife wasn't just a first lady. She made history by becoming the face of the 1886 and 1896 silver certificates. Think about that for a second. We've seen presidents, founding fathers, and even Benjamin Franklin on our money. But Martha Washington? Her image on a banknote is a powerful reminder of how women played a role in shaping America's history, even if it's often overlooked. But wait, there's more. It wasn't until 1890, that's more than a decade before the creation of the Federal Reserve, that the US Treasury began issuing the nation's official legal tender. This means that, for centuries, America's financial system was a patchwork of private printers, local currencies, and government-issued notes. Let's rewind to 1913. The US economy was booming. In fact, it had already surpassed the mighty United Kingdom. But there was one big problem. America's currency system was a chaotic mess. Every bank was printing its own money, and people didn't know if their banknotes would be accepted across the country. Talk about unreliable. Enter the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, a move that would change everything. The government created the Federal Reserve Bank to bring stability to the currency system. This was huge. Finally, America had a central authority managing its money. But guess what? Even though America's economy was growing faster than ever, world trade was still dominated by British pounds. Yup, the UK was still holding on to its financial crown. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Back in the early 1900s, most countries pegged their currencies to gold to keep things stable. Sounds smart, right? But then, boom. World War I broke out in 1914, and everything changed. Countries needed money to fund their military expenses. So what did they do? They suspended the gold standard and started printing paper money. But here's the catch. Printing paper money without gold backing caused currencies to lose their value. It was financial chaos. But wait, the UK tried to stay on the gold standard to maintain its position as the world's leading currency. Big mistake. By the 3rd year of the war, Britain found itself borrowing money for the first time in history. Imagine that, the world's financial leader begging for loans. Now let's talk about a little-known hero in this story, the Spanish-American silver dollar. For centuries, this coin was the primary currency used in global trade, connecting Europe, Asia, and the Americas. In fact, the US dollar itself was modeled after this legendary coin. But in the late 1800s, things shifted. The world moved from silver to the gold standard, and the British pound became the top currency for international trade. After World War I, the US emerged relatively unscathed. While Europe was drowning in debt and rebuilding from destruction, America was sitting on a mountain of gold. Gold flowed into the US during the war, making the dollar stronger and more reliable than ever. By the 1920s, the US dollar started to displace the British pound as the world's reserve currency. The shift had begun. The world of international trade was still dominated by the British pound. It was the currency of choice for merchants, governments, and banks. But then came 1931, and Britain made a move that sent shockwaves across the globe. Britain abandoned the gold standard. That's right. They cut ties between their currency and gold. And the impact? Devastating. International merchants who held their wealth in pounds suddenly saw their bank accounts decimated. Their savings? Gone. Poof. It was a financial disaster. And just like that, the British pound lost its crown. The US dollar stepped in as the new global currency. But this was just the beginning of the dollar's rise to power. Fast forward to World War II. Before the US even entered the war, it was already the Allies' go-to supplier of weapons, food, and essential goods. And how did countries pay for all these supplies? In gold. By the end of the war, America had stockpiled a majority of the world's gold reserves. But here's the problem. Most countries had drained their gold reserves to pay for war expenses. A return to the gold standard? Impossible. So in 1944, delegates from 44 Allied countries gathered in a small town called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their mission? To create a new system that would stabilize the global economy without relying on gold. And what they decided would shock the world? They agreed that the world's currencies would no longer be linked to gold. Instead, they would be pegged to the US dollar. The dollar became the anchor currency for the entire global financial system. And why? Because America had the most gold. And the US government promised to redeem dollars for gold on demand at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. That promise gave the dollar unshakable trust. And just like that, the US dollar was crowned the world's reserve currency. Countries around the world started holding US dollars in their reserves instead of gold. Why? Because they trusted the dollar as much as they trusted gold. But here's the thing. When you're holding a bunch of dollars, you need a safe place to store them. So, countries began buying US Treasury securities. These bonds were seen as one of the safest investments on the planet. Demand for US bonds skyrocketed. But something shocking was brewing in the background. As the world filled its coffers with US dollars, America started spending like crazy. The Vietnam War and domestic programs under the Great Society led to massive deficit spending. And how did the US government fund this? By printing more money. But there was a problem. The more dollars America printed, the less trust the world had in its ability to back those dollars with gold. Countries started converting their dollar reserves into gold at an alarming rate. The US gold reserves were draining fast. And then came a moment that would change everything. The Nixon Shock of 1971. President Richard Nixon made a stunning announcement. The US was severing the link between the dollar and gold. In one bold move, Nixon declared that the dollar would no longer be backed by gold. The world's currencies began to float, with their values determined by the market instead of fixed rates. The age of the gold-backed dollar was over. But here's the craziest part. Even after the gold standard ended, the US dollar remains the world's reserve currency to this day. Why? Because countries still trust the stability of the American economy. In fact, as of the second quarter of 2024, central banks around the world held 58.22% of their allocated reserves in US dollars. According to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, a huge portion of these reserves is held in US Treasury securities. Think about that for a second. More than half of the world's currency reserves are in US dollars. That's how powerful the dollar has become. Oh, here's the million-dollar question. If the US dollar is no longer backed by gold, what makes it so powerful today? Is it America's economy, its military strength, or simply trust? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to see what you think drives the dollar's dominance. And that's the incredible story of how the US dollar rose from chaos to global dominance. From wars and gold to bold moves and shocking twists, the journey of the dollar is nothing short of fascinating.